Thank you for joining today's webinar. Let's go ahead and get started. Today, we will deep dive into guidance CISA recently published, Foundations for Operational Technology Cybersecurity, Asset Inventory Guidance for Owners and Operators, and how this resource can help owners and operators of operational technology systems build towards more secure infrastructure by creating a clear inventory and classification of their assets. My name is Lauren Gray. I work for CISA as a cyber operations planner, supporting the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, also known as JCDC, and I will be serving as the MC for today's presentation. And I will be joined by some of the many stakeholders that contributed to this effort. I am excited to welcome several speakers who are joining us today to discuss topics relevant to the operators of our nation's critical infrastructure. From CISA, I am joined by Clayton Romans, Associate Director of the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, Derek Hitty, also from JCDC, and Sean McCoy from the CISA Vulnerability Management Team. We are also joined by guest speakers, including Michael Tucker, Senior Technical Expert from the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response, known as DOE CESER, and the Energy Threat Analysis Center, known as ETAC, and Andy Kraft, Director of Operations Technology at Loudon Water and co-chair of the Water ISAC Cybersecurity Advisory Committee. Now I'll pass the mic to Clayton Romans, Associate Director of CISA's JCDC, to provide us with a few leadership remarks and get us started. Clayton, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren, and good afternoon, everyone. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and I appreciate my co-presenters for taking the time as well. My name is Clayton Romans. As Lauren mentioned, I'm the Associate Director leading the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative here at CISA. For those of you who aren't familiar with CISA, we're the nation's cyber defense agency, where we are working every day to understand risk to critical infrastructure from a cyber perspective and reduce that risk. And in JCDC specifically, we're bringing together government and industry partners to plan, to share information, and to coordinate the national response to cyber threats, so that we're doing this across the public and private sector as one team. JCDC's goal is to advance synchronized national incident management, bringing the government, bringing the private sector, bringing other international partners to coordinate real-time risk reduction activities that ultimately will protect national critical infrastructure. By brokering information exchanges, enriching intelligence with insights from our partners, and then co-producing threat publications with these partners, JCDC deepens our shared understanding of adversarial behavior and delivers world-class, top-shelf cybersecurity guidance that is tailored to frontline network defenders like yourselves. As we do this, we recognize that the heart of JCDC is this public-private collective defense cybersecurity model. And the strength of our collective efforts lies in the expertise that we at CISA bring, that our interagency partners across the government bring, that our private sector partners and international partners bring as well. And we fuse and enrich our collective understanding with all of these insights. At CISA and across the department, our leadership remains steadfast in their commitment to fostering these partnerships and recognize how critical they are to our collective defense mission, especially in light of the ever-evolving and increasingly complex cyber landscape. Recent cyber risks, increasing targeting of OT and ICS environments in particular, are why this operational visibility and collective expertise model is so important. And today, as Lauren mentioned, we are focusing on advancing OT cybersecurity through the guidance that we recently published through this webinar. This guidance was developed with the operator community in collaboration with a number of really key federal agency partners: the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Security Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Department of Energy is joining us today, as well as some of our international government counterparts and input from many private sector stakeholders, which is fantastic. This is exactly the kind of work we are advancing in JCDC to the collective benefit, we hope, of all of us. Knowing what assets you have, whether it's hardware, software, other connections, is a fundamental step to protecting these environments. And an up-to-date inventory supports all sorts of things in the cybersecurity domain: vulnerability prioritization, detection of unauthorized devices, proper network segmentation, and ultimately faster incident response when we have to ultimately respond to an incident. For small and medium operators, the challenge is often resource constraints, and we recognize that. And that's why we've worked to streamline, simplify, and build guidance that is actionable, hopefully by all of you, our stakeholders. But even doing a modest inventory provides outsized return and risk reduction. A robust OT asset inventory can improve operational continuity, it can support proactive obsolescence management, and it can help operators avoid unexpected downtime. I would again like to thank everybody for your participation today and reinforce that at CISA and in JCDC and across our partner set here, we remain committed to increasing and strengthening OT security and resilience. It is a critical part of our collective cybersecurity and our national security. And as Lauren mentioned, we're always trying to do this better. So we welcome feedback. We want to know what works, what doesn't work, what is actionable, what is hard to action, etc. So please share that feedback with us. And please avail yourself of the other resources that we'll highlight as part of this webinar today. Thank you very much, and back over to you, Lauren.
Thank you so much, Clayton. Today, we hope to answer the following questions. What is an OT asset inventory? Why is this important? And how can I use and implement CISA's recent asset inventory guidance? As you can see, we have a packed agenda. We'll begin with an overview of the background and methodology for the development of the asset inventory guidance. Then we'll provide context for this product and discuss known threats and risks faced by the nation's critical infrastructure operators, including some notable case studies of incidences and their impacts on operators and their customers. Next, we'll hear about the expected benefits of an asset inventory, followed by a partner spotlight, where you can expect to hear directly from one of our partner operators from the water wastewater sector. Finally, we'll dive into the steps for developing an asset inventory, what and who this involves, as well as some realistic examples of the stages in this process. Industry partners informed and contributed throughout this effort, from the scoping and framing of this effort to providing feedback into the product itself. Industry partners have been essential to the development of this guidance. During this process, CISA interacted with 12 industry stakeholder organizations in a series of 8 working sessions. These interactions enabled GCDC to utilize best practices from established OT operators to develop the approach for identifying assets at risk, prioritizing security measures, and building defenses against cyber threats. We also collaborated with smaller owner and operators with the aim of ensuring applicability of this guidance across critical infrastructure operators of varying size and maturity. As Clayton mentioned, we collaborated with federal agencies, including DOE, EPA, NSA, and the FBI, as well as 5 international partners, including Australian Signals Directorate's Australian Cybersecurity Centre, Canadian Cyber Centre, Germany's Federal Office for Information Security, Netherlands National Cybersecurity Centre, and New Zealand's National Cybersecurity Centre. So as you can see, this guidance incorporates insights and best practices from numerous subject matter experts from various perspectives to support OT operators and owners and ultimately uplift the cybersecurity baseline of OT systems. So what is the background for this initiative and why asset inventory guidance? This product is the result of JCDC's ongoing partnership and engagement with operational technology and industrial control system stakeholders. Through our continued collaboration and information sharing, it became clear that critical infrastructure operators, especially smaller, resource-limited entities, need greater visibility and situational awareness of their OT environments. Operators often encounter significant challenges in maintaining a regular asset inventory. These include limited resources, the inherent complexity of interconnected systems, concerns about operational disruptions during inventory activities, as well as the presence of poorly documented or aging legacy technologies. So why is this important? Having an asset inventory is critically important because it lays the foundation for building a modern defensible architecture in OT environments. Being able to accurately identify and classify all assets is a key piece of OT security. Without a clear understanding of what assets exist in an OT environment, organizations cannot protect them. An OT asset inventory, or regularly updated list of how systems, hardware, and software connect, helps identify what needs to be secured and how to prioritize defenses. This is essential for reducing the risk of cyber incidences that could disrupt operations or compromise safety. Asset inventories facilitate operators' understanding of the connections and communications across networks and also provide insight that enable them to strengthen their own cybersecurity resilience, enabling operators to maintain a proactive approach in securing critical infrastructure beyond reactive security measures, moving towards building systems that support long-term resilience and, again, safety. CISA's goal with the publication of this guidance is to support critical infrastructure entities across all sectors to develop their own asset inventories and taxonomies. Again, the first step in strengthening their own risk and mitigation efforts and building towards a more resilient critical infrastructure ecosystem. I'll now hand the mic over to Michael Tucker, Senior Technical Expert from DOE CESER and ETAC, to provide additional context for this effort with a brief overview of the potential consequences of inadequate OT visibility.
All right, thank you, Lauren. An asset inventory, it's a important component of your OT security posture, but it also needs to work with your entire defense ecosystem. It doesn't work on its own. We'll get to that in a sec. First off, a good inventory ensures that you can quickly identify when your risk posture suddenly changes, when the world itself has moved against you, as it were. For instance, this most recent advisory from CISA on Cisco ASAs is a really good example. This is the emergency directive that recently came out. Would it surprise you if I said that there are several OT vendors that use Cisco ASAs for remote access to OT client sites? So one of the ways that you would know this, if you're an asset owner, is through a rigorous asset inventory process, making sure you know what your system consists of, all the components of your system, including the remote support component, and how it's all connected together. Second, a good inventory allows you to identify your most critical systems and be able to work on those systems if and when an incident happens. We have some practical experience with this. DOE CESER just conducted Liberty Eclipse, our annual full-scale cyber response exercise, hands-on keyboard, out at Plum Island. We have utilities from across the nation join us for a red team, blue team exercise on actual substation control systems. If you've heard of the Radix program, this is the successor to that. And our utilities play the blue team defenders. Consistently, the first thing defenders reach for when they're prepping their defenses is that asset inventory, so that they know what assets they are defending, where those assets are, and most importantly, what are the components of the security ecosystem there that they control and how those assets support that. Once they knew what they had, they immediately took that asset inventory and went to the security controls that had been installed on that particular test bed. Those controls gave them the necessary visibility and capability to defend, but they wouldn't be able to use those effectively without a reasonably good asset inventory. And this underscores an important point. All right, an OT asset inventory makes you more able to respond and recover from incidents like those that we subject our utility partners to on Plum Island for Liberty Eclipse. It's unlikely you will be responding alone. You will likely be working with some form of incident response provider. That provider has to be able to set up their additional tools, integrate with your systems, bring their threat intel to the foray, and it have to do it quickly in order to get you back up and running. OT systems, the compromise of OT systems, have physical consequences. It's hard for them to do that if they have to pause and wait for you to confirm if they can add software to an operator station or add a tap to a specific switch, or whether or not a system is normally communicating in a certain manner that's suddenly doing something different. Prepare your asset inventory like you're going into an incident response, and you'll be in a good position to use that investment in both the unfortunate case that you have an incident, but also in the cases where you're developing your defensive controls. I said at the start that I'd be getting to why an asset inventory is part of your OT security posture and why it's an important part, but it's not the whole shebang. A threat isn't deterred or stopped by a gold-plated asset inventory. Threats are deterred or stopped by actual technical controls, like your IT/OT perimeter defenses, multi-factor authentication, dense logging strategies, i.e. visibility, being able to go and figure out what happened, and consistent monitoring, all right, of those dense logging and alerting and event strategies. An asset inventory ensures those controls are applied to everything that needs those controls, but it's those controls that are still the core of your defense and, yes, your incident response. So you'll see on here, I've mentioned a good enough asset inventory. Well, what the heck is a good enough asset inventory? Like, spell it out a little bit. It means that the responsible entity has done their walkthrough. Remember, OT systems are physical systems, right? They interact with the physical world. That means you can go and, while I don't recommend touching them, you can go and see them at least at the very edge of it. And you've noted all those major physical systems and the control systems that they work on and the networks that they plug into. And most importantly, the interactions those OT assets have with common IT networks and your telecommunications networks. It's at this point the focus needs to shift from cataloging every OT asset to drawing a perimeter around what you believe are a good subset of your OT systems. Right? You captured most of the things that you have, and you need to now start moving into crafting defenses or improving your defenses, isolating those pieces, those OT systems and networks from external influences, tightening the perimeter communications and establishing multi-factor. The defenses take time, and the best asset inventory is the one that provides you information to make your defenses the most, the strongest that they can be, all right, and the best that they can be, all right. And that's what I mean by a good enough asset inventory. Once you're done with that, definitely go back, fill it out, get it to 100%, and then maintain it. Because again, you're going to hand this to somebody at some point who is either going to be working on your defenses or is going to be responding to an incident. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, both for your time today and collaboration throughout the process of developing this guidance. Next, Sean McCoy from CISA's Vulnerability Management Team will provide an overview of different threats and case studies relating to insufficient OT asset visibility. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you, Lauren. So my name is Sean McCoy. I lead the Risk and Vulnerability Exposures and Notification section. So what does that actually mean? Our team is responsible for going out and conducting vulnerability notifications to different critical infrastructure out there and looking for different operational technology that's exposed. And to kind of bring it home here into real world examples here, on my left, you'll see a Office of the Director of National Intelligence published a classified report or unclassified report recently outlining reported cyber attacks on the U.S. from 23 November 2023 through 22 April 2024 here. And what we see here is you can see a lot of threat activity from the Cyber Avengers group that we warned about back in 2023 and their exploitation within multiple different critical infrastructures, as well as other pro-Russian hacktivist groups. One of the interesting things that you'll see from this chart here is that it's not focused on any one particular sector. It's spread across all critical infrastructure sectors: agriculture, education, energy, water and wastewater systems, and state and local tribal territorial governments. And then also too, it is geographically dispersed all across America. And one of the things that that's kind of telling us is that the threat actors are potentially looking for opportunities of target-rich environments that are cyber poor, and really taking a look at what they can enumerate from different open source scanning search engines such as like Shodan and Census. They are definitely taking a look at those within there and trying to see what they could potentially exploit and look for potentially IT adjacent connections to those OT systems that are maybe operating on different ports out there. So just to kind of take a look and deep dive into one of the Cyber Avengers cases there, they were known for exploiting a programmable logic controllers of a specific model out there, and that was responsible for regulating water pressure, that was targeted and disabled at one of the authority's booster pump stations and ended up causing damages and operational outages, as well as over $20,000 in repairs there to recover that ended up stopping the water at that site for a significant period of time out there. And the way that they were able to do this was actually through an IT adjacent port there and remoting into the system via the virtual network computing protocol out there. So one of the things that they are looking for as well too is not just the direct OT connection through either Modbus or BACnet, but they're looking for those VNC, the RDP ports that are potentially targets of opportunity of where they can remote in. And this isn't specific to threat actors too that are targeting OT. We do see this a lot within ransomware itself as well too. So it definitely is one of those things that an asset inventory could have helped identify some of these vulnerable systems out there. One of the other things that we know threat actors are constantly doing too is spraying default passwords across all these OT components and IT components to try to see where they can grab hooks into and try to see if they can log in through those default credentials that are baked into a lot of these different products. An asset inventory too could have spotted some of these internet exposed devices out there and could have helped reduce the overall attack surface for that organization. Also too, if you are doing proper asset inventory, it is one of those things too that you'll map it against where you're monitoring and blocking unauthorized remote access to be able to kind of stop these connections from even happening in the first place. And just overall taking a look at some of the CVEs that come out across some of these devices as well too. It can help you track the firmware version and the security patch level of these different devices so that you're able to get on top of that so that they aren't able to exploit those vulnerabilities that may be resident on these OT devices that could potentially present an opportunity for a threat actor to be able to exploit and cause disruption within critical infrastructure. Next slide. So taking a look into two more specific cases as it kind of pertains to CISA here. So one of the things that our team does is we run the CISA's Administrative Subpoena Authority, which allows us to go out to different ISPs and MSPs and figure out who the actual owner is of these OT devices. When we take a look at these devices externally from a lot of these open source scanners, all we see is the internet service provider, and we don't really see who the actual owner is out there. So one of the things that we're able to do through this admin subpoena is reveal who the owner is and then go make notification to that critical infrastructure owner or operator out there and let them know that they have a vulnerability. In one specific case that we saw within Region 6 there, we kept asking and seeing the same device misconfigured in the same way across multiple different utilities and sites within this one state. When we kept asking them who their provider was and their managed service provider, they all kept pointing back to one. So one of the things that we found is that in certain cases, and what we've seen is that some of these integrators and managed service providers that if we that are going out there and potentially misconfiguring some of these devices, and they're doing it across the board for multiple different utilities out there. So it's very important that as you're building the asset inventory, you're incorporating third parties into this. You're making sure you're delineating who's responsible for what, and you're kind of going through and walking them through, hey, how do you have this configured, that they're performing regular audits, that they're making sure that some of this stuff isn't misconfigured out there so that you aren't set up for one of these threat actor exploitations. The other thing that we saw as well too is a recent threat campaign. We were able to see that numerous of the IPs that we had previously notified on before ended up coming in this new threat campaign, and that kind of shows us that threat actors are continuously scanning and targeting these devices out there. So as I mentioned before, they are using the same tool sets that we're using here at CISA of taking a look through like Shodan and Census and trying to see what is available out there to be able to exploit and potentially toss things against. So it is one of those that if you can just take away one thing from this webinar out there, it's to go conduct an external audit of your organization out there and be able to try to see if you can see some of these devices out there, because we do know that threat actors are constantly trying to pound away at it, trying to exploit these OT devices out there. And it really is important to try to get these off so that you aren't a potential target out there for threat actors today. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it back to Lauren.
Thanks so much for those insights, Sean. Asset inventories can provide benefits beyond risk management and incident response. Additional specific benefits include enhancing an entity's organization and management by enabling effective classification of OT assets, their criticality, and the raw physical processes they support. Again, knowing exactly what exists in the OT environment makes managing and retrieving information rather easier. As part of an asset inventory, a taxonomy standardization of terms improves communication, coordination, and collaboration across teams and departments, minimizing misunderstandings and improving collaboration. All levels of an organization can benefit from improved decision-making that results from increased transparency of relationships between dependent systems and their devices. And the implementation of asset inventories and associated taxonomies can reduce inefficiencies, minimize downtime, and improve the overall cost efficiency of operations. Benefits also extend to data analytics. A centralized repository has the ability to improve data analytics as well as the reliability of the insights produced. These elements combined create a robust foundation that not only supports operational efficiency, but can also enable the fortification of critical infrastructure. By having a comprehensive OT asset inventory, organizations can more easily identify potential vulnerabilities, strategize effectively, and ensure that all team members are aligned in their efforts to safeguard essential services. To offer a practical perspective on this, we are pleased to have Andy Kraft, Director of Operations Technology from Loud and Water, with us today. Andy will share his insights and experiences on implementing these strategies in a real-world setting, providing valuable takeaways for operators looking to strengthen their own infrastructures. Andy, over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate the introduction. So real briefly, I am Andy Kraft. I'm the Director of Operations Technology for Loud and Water. Our journey for asset inventory really is rooted in a program that we embarked on to improve visibility to our remote facilities. This was a joint program with our IT partners, and it took about 5 years for us to go ahead and get this fully implemented, but definitely laid the foundation for our asset inventory. We talked to over 100 facilities of varying sizes and complexities. And as you can imagine, the amount of inventory that we have is quite large and again, quite varied. It is something that, we certainly could have started before that, and we did with a manual process. We knew some of our inventory based on maintenance records and things of that nature. But ultimately, in order to gain a really comprehensive inventory, we wanted to make sure that we could do this in such a way that it was automated and maintained and ultimately laid a foundation for future programs. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. So really where this comes down to is once we laid the foundation for our remote communications to where we had visibility to all these sites, we were then able to deploy tools that allowed that automated data collection. So now anything that touches our network, we have visibility on. So as you can imagine, it's all of our IT type assets, computers, servers, switches, so on and so forth, but also all those industrial assets that may be connected. So if you're thinking about things like PLCs and operator interface terminals, but also down to other things like variable frequency drives, UPSs, power meters, in some cases, maybe security cameras or access control systems, HVAC systems. There's a variety of assets that you might not normally be able to include in an inventory or may not have thought of, that now our tools are able to go out and discover and give us a much more holistic view. A quick anecdote, because of some of this visibility, we were able to be much more proactive in one circumstance where we had a water main break, where our systems actually notified us. This is a little different than a cybersecurity system, but certainly because we had this visibility in our system, we now could be proactive and actually take action before we were ever notified by the public, because we knew we had a major pressure drop in one area. In the same vein, if we know we have a loss of communications or some other outage, we can be proactive in a very short period of time because we have this enhanced visibility, this enhanced communications methodology. So alarms are much more timely. Like I said, loss of comms are much more quickly dealt with. We've enhanced our log gathering capability as part of our inventory process. So now we have a very robust capability to hold that data for future analysis should we need to do so down the road if there's an incident. It's a very important piece that we gather those logs and hold them long enough so if an incident does occur and we're asked to provide them, we can do that. And during this process, we also wanted to make sure that we gathered institutional knowledge where documentation was not available. There were some cases where maybe we just couldn't create that connectivity to deploy automated tools. So we had to rely on some of that institutional knowledge, and we certainly did that as part of our process. As a follow-on to this, once you have established this good inventory that you can leverage, it enables many other programs that need that as a foundation. So there was some conversation previously about vulnerability management. Certainly that is an important piece, but also things like patch management is a very important part of what we need to do to stay abreast of circumstances. Risk management leads to crown jewel analysis. If we don't know what our most important assets are and why they're that important, right? How we engage with our stakeholders. If we don't have that inventory, that's hard to have that conversation. Other programs which are really important include backup and recovery strategies. Again, this is part of knowing your assets. Lifecycle management, when things are obsolete, right? Because industrial vendors, the life cycle is 15 to 20 years typically. So we want to know when things are out of support. And even right down to vendor awareness. When a vendor sticks a piece of equipment on our network, we want to know, right? Is it authorized? Is it not authorized? And a good asset management system with automated detection certainly gathers that information. And then finally, I just want to touch on the path forward, how to get started and how to sustain this program. You don't have to be perfect, right? Don't let perfect be the enemy of good progress. Get started. Leverage this guidance and other guidance that's out there. Talk to your peers, talk to other perhaps more mature vendors, and get a plan of action in place. Start with what you know, build from there, bring others along, include all your internal stakeholders, and make progress. And that's what I think I'll leave everybody with today is get started. Don't wait for an incident to happen, and be your own best advocate. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Andy, so much for taking the time today to share your incredibly valuable insights and also for your collaboration throughout the development process of this guide. Next up, Derek Hitty from CISA's JCDC will spend time walking us through the steps to develop an OT asset inventory, including building an OT taxonomy. Derek will expand upon the foundational principles outlined in the guidance, offering additional context and actionable insights to address portions of the guidance where stakeholders can possibly benefit from further elaboration. Over to you, Derek.
Thank you, Lauren. Good afternoon, everybody. So let's shift gears now a little bit and explore the practical application of the guidance. And in this next section, we'll walk step by step through the process of developing and maintaining an OT asset inventory. Along the way, I'll highlight examples specific to the electricity sector. The reason for that is to create a consistent story that aligns with Appendix C of the guidance, as well as a sample visualization we'll be referencing also from the guidance. That way you'll see the concepts applied in one context from start to finish. Let's start with the very first step in the guidance, defining scope and objectives. So this might sound very straightforward, but it's often the difference between an inventory that's completed and adopted and one that stagnates or maybe ignored altogether. The first step is to define the scope and objectives. So why does this matter? Well, because an asset inventory can be as small or as large as you make it. If the scope is too broad, the project risks become overwhelming. If it's too narrow, you may miss critical assets. So how do we define scope? We'll start by asking a series of framing questions, like which sites or facilities are in scope? Are we focusing on a single manufacturing plant, a transmission substation, or an entire regional footprint? Which classes of assets are in scope? Are we capturing protection and control equipment, communications infrastructure, or just the core programmable devices? What is the purpose of this inventory and who needs to be involved? Are we focused on cybersecurity visibility, supporting regulatory or compliance audits, or enabling better incident response? The answers here help bound the effort and establish clear expectations. It's also important to recognize that this kind of project doesn't need to be tackled all at once. Many organizations take a phased approach. That first phase builds momentum, it creates lessons learned, and it ultimately provides a template for the next phase. So for example, an electric utility might begin with a pilot focused on the control house automation equipment, like your HMIs, your engineering workstations, some local automation controllers, and communications equipment. These assets are typically more centralized and easier to access that make them a practical first step. And then once the inventory process is refined and lessons learned from the pilot are applied, the effort can then scale outward to field devices in the yard, such as your relays, your RTUs and sensors and breakers. These devices typically are more distributed and may require more coordination for access and often have additional dependencies. So scope definition not only sets boundaries, but also allows you to identify a logical starting point and build iteratively over time. The next piece is clarity around who does what. Asset inventories touch multiple disciplines, so you need the right people at the table. Think about including your operations staff, those who know the assets and how they're deployed day to day, engineering who understand system design and dependencies, your cybersecurity staff, those who use this data for monitoring and defense, compliance or audit staff who connect the dots to regulatory requirements, and of course leadership who set the priorities, provide sponsorship, and allocate resources. Clear ownership is critical here. A RACI chart can actually be a useful tool, defining who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed at each step of the inventory process. So why does this matter? Well, without clear scoping, ownership, and representation, an inventory wrapped in a taxonomy just becomes another spreadsheet. But with them, it becomes a living framework that helps your security teams prioritize monitoring and identify vulnerabilities, helps your industrial engineers manage lifecycle and maintenance, and helps compliance officers prove control to auditors, and gives leadership that real visibility into cyber and operational risk. So step one here isn't just about paperwork. It's building that governance muscle that makes the entire development effort sustainable. By the end of this step, you should have a written scope statement, a clear set of objectives, and an identified team of stakeholders. That gives you a strong foundation to move forward. Step two is where the real discovery begins, and it's all about identifying assets and collecting their attributes. This happens in two complementary activities. First, a logical survey, and then a physical inspection, which is also commonly referred to as a site walkdown. Let's begin with the logical survey. Think of your logical survey as your paper and interview-based preparation before stepping on site or onto the plant floor. Here, you're reviewing documentation and talking with subject matter experts to get a sense of the landscape. That means pulling engineering and one-line diagrams, control schematics, reviewing SCADA point lists to see which assets are visible in the control system, exporting relay configuration files to capture vendor, model, and firmware information, and gathering network documentation from your IT/OT teams to view things like IP ranges, VLAN assignments, or switchport maps. It also means interviewing operators to understand key process areas and where the equipment physically sits. The goal is to get a baseline understanding of key process areas, major equipment, and expected interconnections. Now, you won't have the perfect data yet, but it's about creating a shopping list so you know what to look for when you're out in the field. Appendix A of the guidance is extremely useful here. It provides a list of asset attributes you might want to capture, like manufacturer, model, firmware version, communication protocols, and ownership. You won't collect every attribute at once, but this list certainly helps you prioritize what information matters most. And then once you've completed the logical survey, the next step is the physical inspection or walkdown. This is where you move from theory to reality and enrich those asset records with details only visible in person. When on site, you physically validate device presence and labeling, confirming every relay RTU, IED, and controller is physically present and correctly labeled. Many times at this stage, you'll find legacy devices or spare equipment or those mystery boxes that aren't captured in documentation. Scan nameplates and markings, record vendor, model, and serial numbers from device faceplates, and sometimes you might even find firmware version data displayed on the front panel or an LCD screen. Trace your connections and cabling. Validate how devices are connected or networked. Does this mean fiber versus copper, redundant versus single connection, patch panel assignments, etc. And validate your rack layouts, comparing what's in the drawings to the real world rack. Again, mismatches are especially common right after upgrades or field swaps. For example, in a transmission substation, you might discover that a bus differential relay was swapped out last year, but never updated in the drawings. The walkdown is a great opportunity to catch those mismatches. Now, as you prepare for and perform a walkdown, there are a few practical recommendations that can make the process more effective and accurate. For starters, go in with a structured checklist to keep the walkdown efficient. Many organizations may also use mobile data collection tools so information can be uploaded directly into the repository later. Bring the outputs of your logical survey, those diagrams or preliminary asset lists, so you can redline them while you're on site. And if approved, take photos. Take photos of nameplates or labels and ensure those details like model numbers and firmware versions are recorded accurately. Coordinate with your site management or field technicians well in advance. They know how the equipment is tagged, which cabinets or panels are safe to access, and can help avoid unnecessary risks of delays. And always prioritize safety from the start. Many sites require additional training or clearances before entry, and appropriate PPE must be understood and acquired in advance. Building safety into the planning process ensures the walkdown is efficient and compliant with site requirements. But the key outcome of step 2 is that you now begin to populate your OT asset inventory with both documented and verified data. At this stage, you don't yet have a taxonomy. That's what comes next. But you've established a credible foundation of factual asset information, ensuring that what's on paper matches what's actually bolted to the rack. It's worth noting here that there are also commercial tools available that can help with this process. Many of them use passive discovery techniques to automatically identify devices on the network, capture those attributes, and build an inventory without necessarily requiring a manual walkdown of every asset. Those tools can add value and reduce the workload, especially in larger and more complex environments. The ability to automatically map and track those assets can save enormous amounts of time, reduce human error, and give security teams a real-time picture of what's in their environment. It's important to remember that one size doesn't fit all. The goal is to know what you have, where it is, and how it connects to your operations. Whether you get there with advanced automation or a well-maintained manual inventory depends on your size, your risk profile, and your resources. So as such, this guidance takes a technology-neutral approach. The guidance we're outlining are intended to be applicable whether you have sophisticated discovery platforms in place or whether you're starting with paper records, interviews, and field inspections. The emphasis is on the process, ensuring accuracy, completeness, and consistency in how you build and maintain your inventory. Now we move on to step 3, building the taxonomy. Now that you've built your OT asset inventory in step 2, this is where we shift from a flat list of assets to a structured view that supports prioritization and decision-making. There are 4 key substeps. We begin by grouping assets according to their primary function or the role that the asset serves within the OT environment. An electric utility in line with Appendix C of this guidance, a simple grouping may start to look as follows: your protection and control equipment, your relays, your RTUs or automation controllers that directly control or trip equipment, your monitoring function, those sensors, RTUs or HMIs that provide visibility into operations, your safety function that your emergency shutdown systems, your safety instrumented systems, or other devices specifically designed to protect people and equipment. Maybe your communication function, those switches, firewalls, radios, gateways, and other network infrastructure that enable data exchange. And lastly, your facility support, your auxiliary power systems, your HVAC, UPS, and other equipment that supports but does not control the process, et cetera, et cetera. This function classification helps us organize devices, not just boxes on a network, but by the role they play in operations. So for example, in transmission, a bus differential relay may fall into the protection and control function. Likewise, a current sensor, such as a current transformer feeding that bus differential relay with scaled measurements, may go under monitoring. Once you've grouped by function, apply a criticality tier to reflect the consequence of failure or compromise. A simple 3-tool model works well here, where you think about your high criticality assets that, if compromised or lost, could impact operational safety, reliability, or regulatory obligations. Your medium criticality assets that are important, but whose loss would not immediately disrupt core operations. And your low criticality assets, whose failure would cause inconvenience but limited operational impact if lost. So back to our previous electricity example, that protection relay is likely marked high criticality, while a secondary HMI or operator workstation that may be used for occasional settings may be deemed more low. This dual lens of criticality and function gives you a taxonomy that is both operationally meaningful and also risk-informed. Next, we don't stop at individual device labels. We organize assets into zones and conduits closely aligned with ISA IEC 62443 standards. We've already organized our assets into functional groups and assigned criticality levels. So now we map them into zones, or those logical or physical groupings of assets that share similar function and criticality, and zones, or conduits rather, which are the defined controlled communication pathways between those zones. To illustrate this, let's look at the 3 examples that we have on the screen, where zone 1 is the local station or substation. This includes assets like your programmable logic controllers, remote terminal units, digital substation controllers or safety instrumented systems, relays, remote terminal access controllers, and maybe sensors. These are the devices directly interfacing with the physical process, executing protection, control, and safety functions. Zone 2 then is the local HMI or station level interface, where here you'll find your engineering workstations and HMIs, maybe CCTV or VoIP phones, and meters. These provide operators and technicians with visibility and local control over the process, but they do not directly trip or actuate equipment. And then zone 3 is our supervisory control. This layer includes your SCADA servers or application servers, your historians, maybe domain controllers and HMIs, and maybe some operator workstations. This is where supervisory functions happen, shifting focus to the broader situational awareness, your logging and reporting, and remote control. Now, what connects these zones are the conduits. So for example, the conduit from zone 1 to zone 2 may use serial or Ethernet connections to pass process data and alarms. But here you see Modbus and DNP3 between the local station and the local HMI zone, representing the field protocol communications. The conduit from zone 2 to zone 3 is often an IP-based link, carrying telemetry to the SCADA server and commands back to the station. But by mapping zones and conduits this way, we gain several benefits. We see those trust boundaries where the controls like firewalls, your jump hosts, or data diodes should sit. We can assign protections appropriate to each conduit, such as encryption, one-way flows, or restricted protocols. And we truly better understand operational dependencies. So for example, if the conduit between zone 1 and zone 2 fails, what visibility or control is lost upstream? The key point is this. Zones and conduits move us from an equipment list to a model of how the system functions and communicates, creating both an organizational map and a security architecture map, showing again where the boundaries exist and which communication pathways ultimately need protection. This next subset is all about mapping dependencies and interactions, essentially how assets work together in a sequence to deliver reliable operations. So that means defining and documenting your hierarchy rules, so how sub-roles fit under broader functions or relationships for what depends on what, your naming conventions for assets and zones, and any roles and responsibilities to understand who is responsible for interacting with these assets. Let's walk through a quick illustration we have on the screen, moving from left to right across the transmission environment. We start with the transmission line because this is the input source of power flow. So its condition, things like current, voltage, and frequency, become the raw data that every downstream device depend on. Next, we have the relays. Relays depend on current transformers and potential transformers to give them the accurate electrical measurements, because without those measurements, they can't detect faults or issue trip commands. Their interaction here is to monitor line conditions and send trip or status signals downstream to the RTU. And then we get to the remote terminal unit, the RTU. Depends on relays, breakers, and sensors feeding it information. It aggregates all of that status and trip data and then transmits it upstream, typically over protocols like DNP3 or IEC 61850 to the supervisory systems. Now, at the SCADA and energy management system layer, these supervisory systems depend on the RTUs to provide a steady stream of telemetry and alarms. That data feeds the operator displays, it triggers alarms, updates logs, and provides a control path back down to the substations. And finally, we land in the control center operations. Operators depend on the SCADA and EMS system to maintain situational awareness. This is where decisions get made and control commands are issued, acknowledging alarms, dispatching actions, or sending open-close signals back down to breakers in the yard. So when you map dependencies and interactions in this way, you start to see the entire operational flow. And by overlaying roles and responsibilities, you ensure each dependency has clear ownership. So who maintains it, who operates it, and who secures it. Lastly, by applying standards like a naming convention, the taxonomy becomes unambiguous and scalable. And by documenting both the structure and the human accountability, you embed the taxonomy into the way your organization actually works. Once the taxonomy is built, we need to take one more step to validate it with stakeholders and visualize it in a way that's useful. But before I dive in, I'd like to note here that the sample visualization we're showing here was generously provided by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in partnership with the Department of Energy's Energy Threat Analysis Center. Their work in this space has been instrumental in helping us communicate these concepts clearly, and we greatly appreciate their support. Now, validation here means that the draft taxonomy, we got to take it back to the people who rely on it and confirm that the functional groupings reflect how they see the system. The criticality levels make sense in practice, the zones and conduits match real communication flows, and the dependencies and interactions align with operational reality. Validation here is crucial because if the taxonomy doesn't resonate with stakeholders, it won't be trusted or maintained. This is also the point to reconcile differences. So for example, an engineer may see a device as a medium criticality, while cybersecurity may view it as a high because of its external connectivity. Those discussions build shared understanding. And once validated, the next step is visualization, turning the taxonomy into something operators and analysts can use day to day. This can include the zone and conduit diagrams highlighting here the 3 zones that we discussed earlier that visualize those trust boundaries and communication paths. Dependency flows, illustrating sequences like the ones we just depicted in the few slides prior. Dashboards or reports that allow filtering by function, criticality, or owner. Visualization transforms the taxonomy from a spreadsheet into an operational tool. So for example, when an incident occurs, operators can pull up a diagram to quickly see which assets are affected, maybe what conduits are in play, and who owns each part of the response. So to recap, step 2 gave us the raw ingredients, the inventory. Step 3 here now turns those ingredients into a recipe that everyone in the organization can understand and use. Once you've developed a taxonomy in step 3, the next question is, well, how do we actually manage and collect all of this data over time? The idea is that the asset inventory shouldn't be a one-off spreadsheet. It really needs to be a living system of record that is secure, accurate, and accessible to the right people. Beyond the core attributes we collected in step 2, consider what other data sources or information could enrich the asset inventory and help in managing those assets. OT assets often have a lot of related documentation and data, so you just need to know where the asset data will come from. Now, this is not a single system job. It really does require pulling from across operations, IT, and cybersecurity. For example, think about your vendor manuals, your maintenance records, past incident reports, geospatial data, procurement details, etc. Incorporating references to these in your inventory can be exceptionally useful. But we're not saying to dump all that information into the inventory, but rather to identify what's available and decide what is worth capturing to meet your individual needs. So for instance, when including the firmware version for each device, that might be high value for vulnerability management, so you decide to track it. Whereas including an exhaustive list of every spare part for each device, well, that might be a little too much detail to maintain. So For another example, if your utilities transformers have dissolved gas sensor readings logged in a system, you might note that in the inventory or link to it for condition monitoring purposes. But the key is to survey what data is out there about your assets and then incorporate the relevant ones to enhance the inventory. And then once you know where the asset data is coming from, the next challenge is making sure that all of those inputs don't stay scattered in silos. And that's where a centralized repository comes in, giving you the one trusted source of truth for the inventory. Now, that doesn't always mean a new tool. This could be as simple as a well-governed Excel file on a secure server, or better, a purpose-built solution like a configuration management database or an OT asset management tool. The important part is to implement security controls to protect this data, because the inventory is a sensitive treasure trove. It maps out all of your critical OT assets, which is extremely valuable to adversaries. So you want to guard it against unauthorized access or tampering. Use access controls to ensure only authorized personnel can view or edit it, and if possible, encryption for the database. Regular backups are also implied, since losing the inventory would be extremely painful after all of this work. Additionally, think about data resilience. If a cyber incident occurs, having the inventory in a protected location ensures you can still access it to aid in a response. So in short, step 4 is all about data stewardship. You're not just collecting once and forgetting, you're creating a sustainable, secure, and integrated system that keeps your OT asset inventory alive and trustworthy. And finally, the 5th step is to implement asset lifecycle management practices in your OT environment. This step is where the inventory becomes self-sustaining by wiring it into the asset lifecycle. There are 2 key aspects here. First, clearly define the stages of an asset's lifecycle as they apply to your organization, so changes in the field automatically reflect in the system of record. Common lifecycle stages include your acquisition or planning and procurement of the new asset, deployment, installing and configuring it, commissioning, making it fully operational, maintenance, any ongoing use, updates and repairs, and decommissioning or retirement and removal from service. By defining these stages, everyone knows the standard process an asset will go through. Next, create policies or procedures that ensure assets are managed through those lifecycle stages, with the asset inventory being updated at each stage. This means building asset inventory considerations into your change management and maintenance practices. For instance, when a new device is acquired and deployed, your procedure should include steps to add it to the inventory immediately with all of its details. When an asset is undergoing maintenance or an upgrade, your policy might require updating any changed attributes in the inventory. Say the device gets new firmware, update that field. Or if it's moved to a new location, update the location field. Especially when an asset is decommissioned or removed, there must be a process to record that in the inventory so that you don't have phantom assets listed that no longer exist. By institutionalizing these practices, the inventory stays accurate and the organization is constantly aware of the state of its assets. The message for step 5 is this: an OT asset inventory is not a one-done exercise. If you don't embed lifecycle management, your inventory will go stale within months and lose its value. But when lifecycle updates are built into everyday processes, the inventory becomes a living system of record. It continuously supports cybersecurity, operations, and compliance, and ultimately enables resilience across the entire lifecycle of every asset. So to quickly recap, we've walked through 5 steps. We've defined scope and objectives, setting those boundaries and identifying roles, performed a logical survey and physical inspection to establish a factual foundation. We've built the taxonomy, classifying assets by function and criticality, and including those dependencies. We've managed and collected that data to consolidate into a secure, sustainable repository. And we've applied lifecycle management to keep the inventory living and useful. The bottom line is this: a robust OT asset inventory is not just a cybersecurity exercise, it's a foundation for resilience, safety, and operational continuity. We encourage every OT operator to adapt these steps to your environment, starting where it makes sense, even with a small pilot, and steadily build toward a living inventory. With an accurate, up-to-date inventory, you can better identify gaps, implement protective controls where they're needed most, and align your inventory in your environment with a modern, defensible architecture. That's what ensures you're not only prepared for cyber threats, but also able to limit their impact and recover quickly when they do occur. We hope the additional detail and examples shared gave you a practical sense of how to put the guidance into action. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Lauren to help guide us through the rest of the session.
Thanks so much, Derek. We want to also thank all of our partners who contributed to the publication of this guidance, and we appreciate your continued collaboration. We are looking forward to continuing to collaborate across the public and private sector to promote the cyber defense and resilience of our nation's critical infrastructure.